So yeah, we will get started. As I sent out in the email earlier in the week on Tuesday, this week we're going to be looking at Unit CUA EVP 413, which is Install and Dismantle Exhibition Elements. This is a diploma unit, and most of the students who are enrolled in the diploma will have this particular unit. Most of the Cert 4 students and the advanced diploma students do not have this unit, but there is quite a lot of overlap for any of the elements that involve the exhibition. So we'll be going over sort of some of the stuff involved in that. Ara's just said, couldn't join last session, couldn't find the recording for printmaking. Did it get recorded? As far as I know, just maybe before the session ends, just remind me to have a look and I'll see if I can find it. I know I sent out the PDF of it, but I usually don't upload the recording. Sue does it, so she might have missed that one. But yeah, just before the session ends, like right at the end, especially if I'm sort of like, hey, we're wrapping up, just send me another message or even send me an email. Send me an email now, so that way when I next look into my emails, I'll be able to go, oh, that's right, I need to check for that recording. Okay, so before we sort of get stuck in, especially because it's the start of a new term, and there might be some students, we've got some new students who are starting their qualifications this term. I think there's 6 new people. You may not be familiar, or some people may have only just started watching these recordings or just joining in for these sessions. So you might not be super familiar with what happens on a Thursday. Basically, each week we go through one of the assessment tasks. I've said to a few people, if you have this specific unit or the unit we're looking at, and you have the opportunity, if you've got 2 screens and you can actually have, a file open with the assessment task, often we end up answering questions kind of as we go. So sometimes you can end up kind of typing your answers in as we go. And it should be made clear to you that any answers that you get during this session, especially if you verbally answer a question or have a discussion that results in an answer, you are absolutely fine to put those answers into your assessments. So you don't need to feel like, if might not be applicable for this particular unit, but if we're doing like a drawing unit, for example, and it says something about, what are some of the properties of charcoal, we have a discussion around what the properties of charcoal are. We say that it can be very soft and powdery. So benefits of using charcoal is that it's easy to blend. A limitation is that it can be quite hard to get, clear line marks or clear, crisp edges. That is a perfectly valid and perfectly good answer. You don't have to sort of think to yourself, oh, okay, well, that answer's been taken because someone else said it or the tutor said it or whatever. You can use that answer in your assessment. If you've got another answer, if you've got something else that, from your own experience, that's also fine. But I just don't want anyone to feel the pressure of kind of going like, oh no, everyone's already said an answer and I haven't come up with my own answer. Therefore, how am I going to answer this question? So having a look at this particular unit, as I say, this is all about the installation and dismantling of our exhibition. This unit is still part of the creative arts units. That's a CUA listed units. But unlike a lot of the other units that we do, this one is quite practical focused in the sense that it is mostly to do with the physical installation and dismantling of the exhibition. So we'll go through what that means. But it's very important that if you have this particular unit and that there is any reason why you are not like physically capable in participating in the exhibition, you need to let us know kind of ASAP, because so much of the requirements of this unit are that you are physically doing things, and it doesn't have to be all, manual handling of objects or anything like that, but you need to be observed physically participating in the exhibition. So we need to know sort of as soon as possible if there's some reason why that's impossible for you, as I say, if you have this unit. Okay, so let's start having a look. As we go through the unit, what we will do, I've got a slideshow here ready, and then we will also from time to time flip across to the actual unit as you see it from your student portal. So we can kind of just go through and make sure that we are answering all the questions as we go. So to start off with, some sort of frequently asked questions relating to this unit. The unit will sort of mention artworks, and so it'll be talking about, your artworks, your body of work. You can use work that you have already done for one or multiple other assessments. In particular, we have body of work assessment tasks like produce body of own creative work. You don't need to produce any new work just for this assessment. So all of the sort of tasks associated with this assessment are very much about how to handle artworks, how to prepare a space for an exhibition, how to hang artworks, all of that kind of stuff. It doesn't actually relate to producing work, so you don't need to produce any new work just for this unit. Also, leading up to the exhibition, there'll be quite a few professional practice sessions which are designed specifically to help you prepare and meet the group requirements for this task. So for today, we're just using this almost as like an introduction. Some of the details, the elements, the participation records and things, we will be going through in a lot more detail during those professional practice sessions. The first session that we're going to have related to the exhibition during professional practice will be week 3. So we're in week 1 now. Next Tuesday will be another professional practice session, which I think is being run by Matthew again. And then week 3 will be the first one where we will be talking about the exhibition, and I will be running that session. So at the moment, what you should be doing or focusing on is gathering works, your own works, which have some kind of theme or underlying concept, which you're proud of or you feel are working, starting to develop really well. And you may choose to use some or all of those for the student exhibition. And it's a requirement that every student completing their diploma level qualification participates in the student exhibition or a similar exhibition. So if you have any questions about your enrolment period or arrangements and exhibition dates, you'll need to bring those up with the school management. So that kind of relates to what I was saying before about if there is some particular reason why you physically won't be able to participate in the exhibition, we need to know as soon as possible. And that's not just me, that's Helen or Sue working in the office. Both of them need to know both the reason and also then, what kind of arrangements we can make around that. So what you need to make, and again, this is something that you can be doing for other units of competency. It's not specific to just this unit, but generally for the exhibition, you need to have a body of work. And a body of work means more than one piece. It can be in any medium or any combination of mediums, as long as it has a single concept. The concept or the idea, the theme can be fairly loose. And also it doesn't need to be, really deep or dramatic or poetic. It can be quite simple, but as we go through other units, like the create body of own creative work units, we can talk a bit more about developing a theme. But some, themes that people have used time and again over the years, artists have looked at things like representing the human form, or working with light, creating artworks that show an appreciation of light, or artworks that are exploring use of color. As much as those themes might be fairly kind of general and open, they're still pretty valid themes. And they also allow you then, if you have some works that you're already starting to develop, it might help you to be able to kind of group those themes together, those ideas and those artworks together. You'll also need to have a visual arts process diary, or any kind of diary or record where you're doing your brainstorming or your mind mapping, where you're thinking about your concepts, recording your experimentations, getting feedback, recording your feedback, and making sure that you are on track in terms of your own kind of deadlines, or the deadlines for the exhibition. Most of our assessments that relate to producing work will ask you for pages or screenshots out of your visual arts process diary. So it's important that you're keeping a record for all of the work that you're producing. You also need to have artist statements and titles for your work. And you'll need to put together a bundle of exhibition-related materials and an example of exhibition advertising. So we will have some group conversations, and we will, once the whole student cohort has come up with the theme and title for the exhibition, then we will sort of, produce like an advertising poster and some flyers based on that theme and title, which will include some of the student work. And then we'll also be posting those things on the school social media, as well as your own personal social media. So you'll need to get screenshots or examples of those, but most of that will be coming later, as we have those professional practice sessions. One thing I will just sort of mention now as well, just going back to touch on the body of work, and particularly concepts and themes, I would very much encourage you, as much as possible, to utilize the knowledge and experience of your tutors. So all of you are working with tutors pretty much every day that you're at the school. And each of those tutors has kind of a different area of expertise. We all have different themes and concepts that we work with within our own practice. We are all working artists, working across a variety of mediums and across a variety of practices. So use that knowledge as much as possible. Ask questions, talk to your tutors about, I'm working on these pieces, but I haven't really come up with a theme. Try and brainstorm things with your tutors. You don't have to come up with everything in a vacuum, and that's what our jobs are. So that's why we're here, is to give you help, to give you feedback, and to help you develop your concepts and your ideas. Okay, what you should be gathering, and some of this is a little bit of what I've already said in the previous one, but we'll just go into a bit more detail. Make sure that you are recording or gathering regular feedback about your body of work as it develops. So that can be from tutors, but also from peers. So one of the great things about being in art school is that you have the opportunity to talk to other artists. Even during these sessions, these assessment tutorial sessions, I will often say towards the end, if anyone wants to gather feedback on their concepts or on their actual works, it's a good opportunity to do so when we have people who are all together. Everyone can have a discussion at this time, and make sure that you are making a note of the date and the name of the people that you've gotten that feedback from. Take note of any feedback given to you about your work and ideas, both here and professional practice. That's essentially what I just said then. Always take regular progress photos of every stage of development of your body of work. So this one's really important because, and even I'm a bit guilty of this, it's easy to kind of get get locked into producing your work. Sometimes you kind of get into that flow state where time seems to pass quite quickly. Or you might be sort of thinking, oh, I'll just do a little bit more before I take the next photo because the image, doesn't look good enough yet. But every single assessment that relates to producing work will ask you to show different stages of development of that work. And you're not being assessed on what it looks like when you first put your first block in or your first lay in. You're not being assessed on what it looks like halfway through. All we need to see is that you have been developing the work. So the reason why this is really important kind of ties in a little bit to, I guess, the RTO system. So this is a little bit of a digression, but it's important to understand. So the RTO system, Registered Training Organisation System, which Sydney Art School is a part of, and other institutions like TAFE are also the same RTO system. There are sort of requirements for the government to acknowledge that someone has, demonstrated that they have the knowledge, they have the understanding, they have the skills to get the qualification that has been given to them. So if we think about it from the perspective of, let's say 5 years down the track, our school is audited, which happens periodically. It's just like random spot check, essentially. The government will send a representative to different RTOs, including Sydney Art School, and at random they will take an assessment that has been completed, and they'll look through the assessment. And what they're looking for is they want to make sure that all of the specific criteria from their side of things has been met by all of the evidence that the students have provided and that the school has recorded. One of the biggest things is that you, as the artist or the student, have actually produced the work that is being given as evidence. Now, part of the way that we record that has happened is that we get tutor feedback. So having a record of, yes, I spoke to this specific tutor who was watching me work on the piece and was, observing me as I developed it, gave me feedback, and then I made changes. That's like a verbal kind of record that you had been observed. But another way to ensure that the work was definitely being produced by you and is definitely your own work is by showing different stages of the work, of the development of the work. And obviously it's never happened with our school because we're always diligent about this, but there could be a case that someone was looking at an assessment and all they see is a finished piece. And when they go back through and try and look for further evidence that the work was definitely produced by the student, they might find, oh, interesting, there was no feedback from a tutor, which means that no one actually watched them do it. It just seems like they showed up one day with a completed painting. So there's no way to really guarantee that that painting was actually produced by that person. So having those pictures at every stage of the development of your body of work and of your individual artworks means that there's no question. And that then means that your qualification will always definitely be valid. So that's one reason to be doing it, is because absolutely we need it for the evidence for our units of assessment. The other reason to do it is because it's quite interesting to reflect on. I am now in the habit of taking photographs at most stages of development of my work. And it's instructional, obviously, for my students to be able to show any of you how I've developed a piece. But it's also interesting for me to be able to look back and kind of go, oh, okay, so that's where I started. Maybe at this earlier stage, I should have thought about X, Y, or Z rather than, rushing on to the next stage. And it can also be quite useful for social media. It can be quite useful to be able to make a story out of the developing stages of your work. I know that I'm someone who, when I'm scrolling through Instagram, if I see a reel that's someone actually developing an artwork, I almost always will stop and watch it. especially if I can see the first layered stages, seem quite loose or abstract. And then as you see it develop and as you see it kind of grow, you kind of see them making changes, you see them making refinements, and then the final piece looks amazing compared to how it was developing. So I think it's such a useful thing to do. Aaron's just popped a question in the chat. I'm doing a digital work for the exhibition. Can I include a speed video of the process or layers I've used? Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the evidence, quite often, if it's sort of saying your stages of development, it'll be the only things that you can't upload a video because the file will be too large. So probably what I would suggest is upload screenshots at certain stages of like the development of the process. Or, as you say, you could even take screenshots or save off the separate layers and just label them, because that will show that yes, you've developed it from scratch. It's not like a AI generated artwork or something. And that's to be honest, again, I know I'm going off on another tangent, but that's another issue that I think increasingly we might have to face as well, which is obviously mitigated by the fact that the majority of artwork people are producing in our school is traditional physical artwork and not digital images. But yeah, being able to show the layers or a speed video of the process is really useful. And I think for the evidence, for the assessment, you can certainly be taking screenshots from that speed video. Just continuing on, keep receipts to track your budgeting. This is not just important for your assessment, I would say also generally as you develop as an artist, as a professional. Anyone who then continues on to get an ABN and become a sole trader as an artist in Australia, you definitely should be keeping your receipts, because a lot of it is going to be things that you can claim back. So all of your art materials you'll be able to claim back once you have an ABN. And that's particularly important if you've made a sale, then and so you're actually making money. But as far as I know, I don't think the legislation has changed, but even if you aren't making money from your artwork, you can still claim, if you have an ABN and your ABN is like effectively running at a loss, you can deduct from other money that you have earned. And this is specific to our industry. So what I mean by that is, and this is a situation I was in when I was in art school, for example, I was developing to be a professional artist. Oh, Ari asked, what does ABN stand for? Australian Business Number. Yeah, so if you want to, and when I say become a professional, this includes just selling your artworks, in exhibitions, selling them online, doing commissions. You should definitely consider getting yourself an ABN. It doesn't cost anything to get an ABN. What you do need to demonstrate to continue to use an ABN is that you are pursuing art in a professional capacity. And the ways that you can be doing that, even if you aren't selling artworks, as much as you might like, the ways that you can be carrying on in a professional way would be making it clear that you are available for commissions, or that you are trying to sell artwork. So, on your social media, you might have in your profile available for commissions, or you might have it on your website, send me an email or a message to buy an artwork or buy a piece. It would include entering competitions where the artwork is for sale. It would include joining any exhibitions where the artwork's for sale. It would even include doing what you're doing at the moment, which is studying to become a professional artist. So all of these steps are recognized by the tax office as being in the pursuit of becoming a professional artist, as opposed to a hobbyist. And if you are pursuing art as a professional artist, then you should get an ABN, an Australian Business Number. You'll be listed as a sole trader, meaning sole as in one person, an individual, and your business name will be just your name. So my ABN is attached to the business name Krista Brennan. And if you are in a situation where you are not earning as much money as you are spending on your artistic practice, so let's say in the last financial year, you sold 2 paintings for $500. Fantastic, good work. However, in the last financial year, you also spent $150 on your web page and website, social media, and advertising campaign. Let's say you also spent another $500 on canvases, paints, paintbrushes, all of that sort of palaver, everything that's involved in actually making your artwork. Let's say you also have a home studio and it's a dedicated room in your house where you only paint. It's clear that it can't be used for anything else. And so a percentage of your rent is being used as a home studio space. And it might be, let's say it's 10%. 10% of your rent is being spent on that studio space. All of these things are tax deductible. Now, you only made $500 with your ABN. Through your ABN, you only collected $500 on those 2 paintings that you spent. But overall, throughout the course of the year, you spent $5,000. And I'm just plucking these numbers out of the air, but let's say you spent $5,000 on materials, advertising, social media, renting the space to do your work, school fees, all of these things, right? So you are now in a deficit of $4,500 that essentially you've kind of lost in terms of your business. Now, most of the time for most ABN holders, most sole traders, if you have lost money, that money's just gone. It means you won't pay tax on the $500 that you made with your ABN, but the $4,500 you can't deduct into negative money. Artists are considered to be sort of special in this regard by the tax office. And in some ways it's a little bit it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because essentially the tax office is assuming that as artists you won't make money. So they're kind of cutting us some slack. So if you're not making any money out of your art, you probably have another job. Maybe you've got a part-time job where you're working at a cafe. Out of the wages that you made from the cafe, you would have your normal deductions, which might be cleaning your uniform or, travel expenses, whatever it might be. You can also deduct $4,500 into that other pay. And as I said, it's specific to artists, and it's only because it's understood that artists end up spending a lot more money, and unless they're very successful, sometimes their business will be running at a loss. So when you put your tax return together, and just want to make it very clear, I am not a tax professional, so this is not actually tax advice. You should definitely check this with your, taxation professionals, which might be an accountant, or you can call the tax office. But this is currently my understanding, so further investigation needed, is that you can deduct any losses from your art associated ABN from any other income that you're making. It does mean that when you put in your tax return, you need to make sure that you declare your ABN, like the majority of payments coming to your ABN is in the artist or artistic practices. I think it's like arts, entertainment, and recreation sector. So anyway, what all of that boils down to is save your receipts. Any money that you spend on producing your artwork, educating yourself to become a better artist, transport of your artworks, entering competitions, like the fees that we pay to enter competitions, everything that you spend on producing artwork, make sure that you are constantly saving those receipts and logging those receipts, because a lot of it will be tax deductible when you have an ABN. Yeah, and again, I'm not a tax professional, so this is not advice. I just want to make that really clear for legal reasons. But it is worth investigating, double checking for yourselves, check with the tax office or check with, a tax accountant. Some tax accountants don't know. I will just say that because it is a pretty niche kind of industry. But if you can find a tax accountant that is familiar with the arts and creative entertainment recreation sector, they will know. Okay. Continuing on, so later on, when we have conversations in the professional practice sessions about the exhibition and theme titles, make sure that you do take a note of the different ones that we come up with, because you will be asked later on in this unit for, what theme and title suggestions did the group come up with. Take note of any major decisions about the overall budget for the exhibition, the space allocated to each student, marketing strategies, etc., as this information will be confirmed in the professional practice section lessons. And make sure that you have images of your work before and after getting ready for presentation. So if you have works on paper, for example, take a photo before you get it framed and take a photo once it has been framed. All right, that was, so far that feels like quite a lot of information. So let me just pause for a second. Does anyone have any questions? Is there anything that we're not super clear on? Feel free to just unmute yourself as well. You don't have to type anything into a chat. There's not that many people here.
It's Jane here. When you're saying the exhibition theme and title suggestions, do we have an overall theme for everybody, rather than each individual student?
Yes, that's right. So when we start discussing the exhibition in earnest, we will come up with an overall exhibition title, and there will be an overall exhibition theme. It'll be very broad, because it always is, and it has to be. So there will be ways that you can kind of adapt your work to it somewhat, but also there's not really that much pressure for you to kind of adapt your work, if that makes sense. So what I mean by that is, like, we had an exhibition a little while ago that was called Euphoria. So it was quite open, and it was just about sort of, celebrating the things that make us feel euphoria, feel joyful, the sort of the human condition, why we feel joyful, how we feel joyful. Some people even just went with the reverse of, like, the lack of euphoria in their lives and, longing for it. And so you could essentially, everyone could kind of find a way to adapt that to the work that they were producing. But even within that, one person submitted 2 pet portraits that they'd been commissioned to do. And, in terms of adapting that or finding a way to sort of fit that to the theme of Euphoria, I think they just sort of went with, well, pets make people happy. So yeah, it's not to say that once we have a theme and title that you have to produce work that absolutely rigidly fits that theme and title. But it is kind of, I guess, good practice in the sense that if you're involved in other group shows in the future, there will have to be, a little bit of kind of almost retroactively fitting your works into that theme. Sometimes, you might find yourself kind of going, okay, I've got a group show that's like, there was a group show for Hornsby Art Society recently that was called Living in the Shire, I think, or something along those lines. Anyway, And they basically said, you know, the artworks that we're looking for is artworks that are thematically around kind of the Hornsby Shire, living in the Hornsby Shire, or the history of the Hornsby Shire. And then towards the end of the sort of the spiel, like as in the exhibition entry requirements, there was almost something in brackets that was like, look, if you live in Hornsby, then you know you have an association with Hornsby, that'll be fine. So you know, people could essentially enter whatever they liked just by kind of going, well, I live here, so therefore it relates to my experience of being here, even if the piece had literally nothing to do with living in the Hornsby Shire. So yeah, I think it's something that will happen in the future. If you're involved in group shows or group exhibitions, you'll have to find ways to kind of tweak your artwork, tweak your theme, tweak your artistic statement so that it does kind of fit into a specific theme or, you know, title for a show. But we're not being too rigid about it either. Any other questions? Okay, if not, we will keep going. So in terms of when we do start working on the exhibition, I'll also say, because I haven't said yet, when it will be, the exhibition will be in term 4. At this stage, we don't have a specific date set. I just haven't heard back from management about specifically, you know, if there's a weekend that they can't do. But it will probably be week 5 or 6 of term 4. So that'll be right at the end of or beginning of right at the end of November or the beginning of December. So at the moment we're just about to hit August. So it'll be August, September, October, November. So at least 4 months probably have. And yes, as soon as possible, certainly before week 3, before we have that first professional practice meeting, I will have the date set. And so I'll be able to give everyone that date. But things that are collaborative, so things that everyone needs to be involved in or will be involved in, include planning the exhibition theme and title, making a promotional strategy, including like key dates of how often we'll be promoting things to social media, and what we'll be promoting, making marketing material, but you can also design an example of your own individually, making Facebook event and other social media announcements, curating the exhibition and making a strategy for how to display your own pieces, including any jewellery or 3-dimensional objects you might have. Planning and discussing the opening night, including allocating jobs. For example, who's going to distribute the catalogues, who's going to open the evening, who will manage washing up platters and so on. Discussing and planning how to curate and hang the exhibition, including the amount of space allocated to each person. A roster for monitoring the exhibition during open times, and making sure that everybody's on the same page and logged into the student Discord, I should say. And this will happen in a future professional practice. In terms of things that you need to do individually, we've kind of touched on some of these already, but just going over them again. You'll need to have your own body of creative work, so planned and completed by the time the exhibition rolls around. You'll need to document your process, including photos of all of your works in process. So it's just plugging my laptop in. You'll need to write your own individual artistic statement and give your artworks titles. You need to photograph your work before framing and hanging, and also on the walls. You'll need to frame and finish your artworks, including putting D-rings on the back of every piece that's going to hang on the walls. And you'll need to plan your own presentation, including any elements such as plinths, tables, if needed. So as I say, a lot of this we're going to go over more thoroughly in professional practice. But it just gives you a little bit of an overview of the things that are going to be required as a group and also individually. So what's an exhibition usually like? It's usually like me being kicked out, apparently. Yep. So this is a video from one of our previous exhibitions. So this particular exhibition, we did have a lot more student speeches, but we also had less less students, to be honest. So yeah, as I said, this is from 2019. I think this was just maybe like just pre-COVID, which is why everyone's still hugging and kissing each other. Yes, no, it must have been 2020 was first shut down, wasn't it? Anyway, so back then we only had a student cohort of about 20. And so all of the students were required to give like a speech about their works, sort of talking about their works. These days, we're ending up with cohorts more sort of in the 30s. So obviously there's not quite enough time to allow for everyone to talk. But what we will have is one student speaking on behalf of the students and talking about the artwork title and theme, and, you know, just saying a few words on behalf of the student body. And then the rest of what you can see here, like people receiving their qualifications. So the students from the previous year who finished all of their assessments and received their qualifications, we'll hand those out on the night. And then you can see it's just lots of, you know, friends, family, local community coming in. We'll have wine and drinks. There's big platters with food and nibblies. And yeah, it's just a lovely big kind of social evening. Artworks usually for sale, but that's also up to individual artists. So yeah, that's what an exhibition kind of looks like. So a few things which I've already sort of touched on here. Before the exhibition opens, so that was the opening night as well. So before the exhibition opens, we'll be doing advertising and promotion, collecting all of the artist statements and getting the run sheets and catalogs all together, preparing the signage and any kind of extra elements that are needed for the night. And that includes as well with the preparation of food and drinks, making sure that we have tables, tablecloths, platters. We've got cleaning, washing up materials, any food hygiene, safety kind of elements as well. And the actual physical installation of the exhibition. So these are all things that are happening in the days or the week kind of leading up to the exhibition. Then during the opening night, we've got the speeches by the staff, speeches by student representative, and the awarding of qualifications for those who've earned them. And then the exhibition will also be open for usually the couple of days after, so the Saturday and Sunday after the opening night, which needs to be supervised by the students. And so people will need to volunteer to come in and look after the exhibition while it's running. On the Saturday, there are still classes on, and so it's usually myself and Morris will be upstairs during that time, but we're both running classes, so we are not taking care of the exhibition. On the Sunday, there's no one in there, so on the Sunday, it's absolutely, really integral that there's at least 2 responsible students at any time who will be looking after the exhibition, making sure that no one's just kind of, wandering in. And then afterwards, we usually leave everything hanging for a couple of weeks. So if we run it in week 5 or 6, it'll be week 7 or 8 that we then have the tear down, meaning all of the works that were unsold are taken back off the walls, and the artworks that are currently hanging on the walls are put back up, and everything is cleaned up and tidied and essentially made to look like it did before. Having a little look now at some exhibitions, some existing exhibitions for a bit of inspiration. I really want you to pay attention to how the works tie together or communicate clearly that the sort of overall idea or theme of the exhibition. Because whether you're working towards your own exhibition or our school exhibition or any other kind of group show, sort of paying attention to what makes what makes an exhibition compelling to an audience is really important. Sometimes if you think about really big exhibitions, it's going to be kind of name recognition. So, a big exhibition comes from overseas by a particular famous artist. People are going to go because of the name recognition. But when it comes to other exhibitions, especially for students who are, or young professionals who are kind of just developing their work, we need to kind of think about what makes an exhibition sound compelling enough that people will want to come and see the works and meet the artist and even buy the works. So we'll have a look at a couple of examples. First up, we have our very own Michael Sims.
Human behavior and what drives human behavior. So I was really interested in the Freudian idea of eros and thanatos, which is that humans have these 2 instincts, the death drive and the life drive. So the drive to create life and be creative, which also exists alongside the death drive, which is the drive for people to kind of self-destruct and destroy things. I found that really interesting as a concept, particularly at the moment when we're seeing humanity is just changing in such a dramatic way. And also just became really interested in the idea of human contact at that time, and even more interested in the human body, its potential to be like a weapon to unintentionally cause harm to others, and also the vulnerability of the human body as well. One of the things that I found really interesting that a lot of people were experiencing with the sort of high levels of stress that we collectively as a society were sort of going through was having very strange sleep and unusual dreams, and I was certainly experiencing that. And I started to keep a dream journal throughout all of this. And the more that I was writing down, the more I was dreaming. And I found that, the idea that, our sleep is this sort of gateway into the unconscious. I know there's probably a little bit too much emphasis put on analyzing dreams sometimes, but I still found that for me it was very useful to keep a record of that. And I found I was getting certain types of images coming to me throughout my dreams, which were also a source of inspiration. That was a very different experience for myself as well.
Michael's so eloquent talking about his work. I always find it really, really lovely to talk to him about what he's working on. If any of you have had him as a tutor, you'll also know he is very, very humble, quite approachable. Sometimes even, he still doubts himself. He still doubts his own work and his own abilities. So he's someone who I think is extremely valuable to talk to about developing your own kind of professional practice and also developing your own themes and ideas, because he is someone who does think quite deeply about the works that he produces. Let's have a look at a different example here.
My name is Beth Carter. I make sculpture and drawings. I model work in clay and go from handheld to life size. My work is figurative and I use lots of allegory and metaphor. I use animal imagery quite a lot in a kind of symbolic way and draw on lots of personal sources.
Hi, I'm Dorothy. I'm an artist in New Orleans, Louisiana, and I paint in oil paint. Well, the pieces in the Art and Doom show, two of them are centered around abortion rights. Princess is a more emotional piece and less political. When someone is elevated to the point of dehumanization, when someone is worshipped, for example, they cease to become a person and in the process being dehumanized and treated like an object.
I'm William Woodward, and in this series of the 7 Deadly Sins, I wanted to use the figure to tell a story, but not to preach about sin or anything like that. The 7 Deadly Sins was a challenge I set myself. I wanted the figures to be about something and not just a human figure for its own sake. I thought, how about the way Fellini would do it? Or how about the way that they would do it in Berlin with Kurt Weill, the Dry Goshen Opera? So there's a tradition of the 7 Deadly Sins. I also was inspired by some murals I painted that are now in the Ringling Museum in Sarasota, Florida, The Greatest Show on Earth. And those images crept into the paintings of the sins. 2 of these sins are shown, along with this grand finale concert of the sins.
I have 8 pieces in the Doom show, 4 of which are from my first Sin series. A group of urns that have images I shot in various museums around the world dealing with doom, sex, avony, snakes. I also have one of my requieries in the show dealing with death and destruction, mostly skulls, guns, and grenades. Every image of the work has gone through my camera. I started throwing pots about 6 years ago, and I've been working as a professional photographer for 35 years, so the merging of the two seems natural element for me. They're all wheel thrown, blades, decal images are applied to the surface. The shapes come first for me, the images come second.
The 8 paintings in the exhibition are part of a series of oil paintings on inkjet canvas. I start by sometimes manipulating the image in Photoshop or processing software to alter the code such that there are glitches or changes to the image that interrupt it. I then continue by painting the image on the masked off when I use oil paint on the surface, and this means that as I'm painting, it covers an area of the image, and I get to peel that off and peel it again.
Through my research and personal interests, it's exciting to have the opportunity to curate an exhibition presenting such varying perspectives and medium. The show and gallery alike seek to promote artists who use their individual platforms to inspire and enact social change.
So I think that that's quite a good example of a variety of artists working in different mediums who, if you look at all of those artworks or those collections, those bodies of work separately, it would be almost difficult to find a way to unify them, because they are all quite different, quite separate, and there's sort of the links between them, I would say, are almost a little bit tenuous. But they've kind of found a way, Art in Doom, the springtime group exhibition, they've sort of found a way to kind of cover most of those bases. Even if the artworks themselves are still fairly disparate, there is overall, a bit of a connection or a flow through, that the artworks are either, a little bit dark, or they're a little bit distorted, or they're dealing with themes of death, or they're dealing with, themes of human struggle, or whatever it might be. And so when we're thinking about our exhibition, obviously we have more artists than even this, but there are ways to kind of tweak and manipulate a general theme to fit all of the works to it. It certainly doesn't mean that we have to just all produce new works that fit the theme that the group has decided on. Sorry about the adverts.
We got a really flexible space here, and we change it on average every sort of 8 to 10 weeks.
All the exhibitions are completely different, and everyone brings a different set of challenges.
You can change the look and the feel of it. Sometimes we change the wall colours. We've got screens on wheels that you can move around. You can use all of them, or you can use none of them. It's really important not just to think about what you're putting in the space in terms of artworks, but also kind of how you configure it and what the experience is for the visitor going round that exhibition. You can create a mood with how you treat your exhibition space, a mood and atmosphere, and I think visitors really respond to that. We actually have an exhibitions panel that considers all upcoming ideas for exhibitions.
I sit on the exhibitions advisory panel, and I get to hear all of the different exhibitions that are put forward, and I'm able to have my say as to whether I think that they are going to be popular or not.
That's a really kind of healthy process, because if you consult with others, not just at the beginning, but throughout the process, you're much more likely to get it right. Considering your audience is like the golden rule. You've got to do that from the start, because the success of the exhibition will stand or fall on the extent to which it's visited.
Most of the time, you can kind of work out what the audience is going to be, and you can really build it around them.
You would distribute the focal points around the room because you want them to draw people in particular directions.
There's a really wide variety of different ways of laying out an exhibition, and it really is dependent on the space, what you're exhibiting, and what the curator is trying to express to the visitors.
There's always a narrative, a story that you're trying to tell. The narrative, in a way, dictates the order in which the works are displayed.
We do tend to do it chronologically. We can do it by theme occasionally.
people like to have a story. They like to follow a narrative, and if you can achieve that in your layout, then I think it makes a better exhibition.
The consideration when we create labels is really what we want the visitors to learn from the label.
I would never want a label on these walls that is longer than 100 words. No, short sentences, plain English, keep it relevant, and make sure what you say expands on what people are looking at.
We want there to be something visual that they can see, but also something physical and practical they can do while they spend, you know, maybe an hour or so in the space.
We'll have lots of school holiday events for families, talks and tours as well for adults, but it needs to be related to whatever the exhibition is at the time.
The gallery shop needs to change every time the exhibition changes, because obviously every exhibition is different. So retail is an important part of the visitor experience because it extends the lifetime of that exhibition beyond the actual show. It means visitors can get their hands on something they can take home with them. It's that link between the visitor and the works on display.
You've got to get your message out there using as many different means and platforms as possible.
You need to focus not only on the title, because the title is what people are going to see before they see the exhibition.
Titles, a bit like labels, need to be pithy and to the point. They need to kind of mean something to your audience.
You also need to think about the photography you're going to use, the images you're going to use, posters, because that's how people really get an idea of it. And definitely in marketing, one of your big considerations should be your budget. Marketing is quite an expensive thing to do. Placing an advert can cost lots of money, and you need to be mindful of the fact that if you place that advert, how many people do you then need to attract on a £4 ticket to make that advert pay for itself?
The more preparation you do in advance, the less pressure you'll be under when it comes to actually putting the work on display.
I think if you wanted to put on your own exhibition, my advice would be to really know your subject.
Have a clear idea of what you want to achieve, really have fun with it, and develop something which you're really proud of.
Bounce your ideas off others, pull in as much help as you can from the outset. Make sure you're having fun.
Excellent. So that's from the perspective of putting together the exhibition, like the physical curation of it, the marketing of it, all that kind of stuff. So some of that as I said, we will go over during our professional practice sessions. But I think though between those 3 videos, we've gotten a nice overview of an artist talking about their own show, artists talking about a group show, and then a little bit from the sort of the gallery sides of things and the practical stuff that needs to happen leading up to an exhibition. Something that I think was good to kind of take away from that as well, because this is a discussion point that we have during the professional practice about the exhibition, but it's also something that is in some of your units relating to the exhibition, which is considering your audience. And I thought what was really quite interesting in that video is the way that for the exhibition that they had that involved works for a younger audience, they included practical activities. So that's the sort of thing that's going to engage younger people and make them want to stay in the space longer. I thought it was also interesting that they were talking about the sort of the narrative flow of moving through a space. And so making sure that there is some sense or reason or purpose as you walk through the space, that the works kind of make sense the way that they flow together, or that they've been grouped together in a way that highlights them rather than detracts from them. So there's obviously some, with our own space, there's going to be some sort of considerations in terms of how big the space is, how many pieces we're going to have, how many artists we have exhibiting, all that kind of thing. So there are kind of physical limitations to some of this. But there's quite a lot of opportunity as well. And when we think about our audiences and think about the people who might want to come and see the show, we really want to capitalize on what's going to interest them, what's going to impress them, and what's going to make them, you know, potentially want to buy the artworks if we're putting them up for sale. Excellent. So if we could have now just a little bit of a discussion here, thinking about some of these kind of key points. So what makes a good exhibition? How can we select an exhibition theme when everyone has different artwork concepts? How can we engage our audience and in particular our local community? How can we be considerate of other artists when preparing for the exhibition? And what will you do as an individual to begin preparing for your own contribution? So what goes into making a good exhibition? Does anyone have any kind of thoughts on that? And you can reflect on any exhibitions that you yourself might have been to. You know, what particularly stood out to you? What do you remember about it? What made you, you know, want to go and see that show in the first place?
I'd quite like to go and see the Cézanne exhibition on at the National Gallery because I like Impressionist painters and I'd like to see a whole lot of his works together. So that's probably a good exhibition because they've collected paintings from different places by the same artist.
So yeah, so in terms of, because that's not Cézanne specifically, but like the big name recognition exhibitions.
Yeah.
Thinking about that and talking about that. So before we go to an exhibition, what is attractive? I think you've already pointed out a couple of things. Is if you know the name, if you know the name of the artist, and you're interested in their works, then you want to see their works. And so what are we looking for in terms of anticipating going to that exhibition? What are we hoping for?
Probably a variety of works done by the artist over a period of time, showing the development of his technique. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So
I suppose you want a you want some sort of story to be told about his career through his painting. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially if there was different periods of his development. So as you say, you know, the sort of like if there's the early works, later works, you know, mid career works, how did he change as an artist? What impact did the Impressionist movement have on his artworks? All that kind of thing. And we're hoping to see a lot of works and a variety of works. So if that's going to make a good exhibition, what would make it a poor exhibition? Like in what ways, you know, how would you, if you came away disappointed, why would you be disappointed?
Well, if they all the paintings were the same and there wasn't much variety, you know. If there weren't very many, and if there wasn't much explanation, so you're not just going to look at the paintings, you're often interested in, you know, he said you'd put less than 100 words, but whatever the little less than 100 words they put next to each painting explaining stuff, I find is interesting.
Yeah.
And if there weren't enough, you know, if there weren't very many pictures, I'd be a bit disappointed.
Yeah. Yeah, good. I think those are all good answers and all possibilities as well. So I can think of many exhibitions I've seen over the years. Ones that were my favorite exhibitions had all of those points. And again, we're talking about the big name exhibitions, had all those points that you mentioned, a variety of work, some sense of the sort of narrative or the career of the person. For me as well, because I get so interested in kind of investigating the works, like visually working out how they produce the works. If there are works that are also like unfinished pieces for me, or like preliminary pieces, sketches, that kind of thing. I get very excited about seeing those because I like to see what the artist's process was. And a variety of works, and lots big impressive pieces, that kind of thing. That's what gets me really excited, and that's what I think about when I say an excellent exhibition that I saw. It will have those sorts of characteristics. So a really fantastic exhibition, the one that springs straight to my mind, is there was a massive Arthur Streeton retrospective a few years ago, and I mean there were almost borderline too many works. It was so many works that there was a certain point where I started to actually feel a bit overwhelmed by how many amazing works I was seeing. So that's an exhibition where I came away super impressed and extremely happy that I'd gone. An exhibition that was not that was very much the kind of the opposite in terms of all of the things that you mentioned being not great, not a variety of works, not many works, was an exhibition that I saw years and years ago, which was called, I think, Caravaggio and His World. And so the and His World should have been a tip-off, because I think there was basically 2 Caravaggio paintings, maybe 2 or 3. And then the rest were just people who were around or associated with, or, in some way kind of linked or nearby. And so as an exhibition, I was very disappointed with that. I did see one Caravaggio that I really loved, but it was like right as you entered, it was one of his St. John the Baptist's paintings. And I walked in and burst into tears, and then had to be kind of gently led out of the room because I got really super emotional I just was dumbstruck by how amazing that particular piece was. But it was the first thing that I saw. And then I walked through the rest of the rooms, and there was 2 other paintings, much smaller, less impressive, and all of the other associated works were just nowhere near the same, kind of stature or quality. So even though that one work made me really emotional, the rest of the exhibition I found very disappointing, and I was, sort of annoyed that I spent money on it. So thinking about what makes a good exhibition, it's those characteristics in terms of especially big name exhibitions. Other things, if we thought maybe a little bit more about a smaller kind of exhibition, so maybe a group show, or even a prize. Has anyone been to any group shows or prizes that are a little bit smaller in scale? Because if you're not, you should be.
The Archibald Prize? Is that the sort of thing you mean, or?
No, I was thinking more along the lines of like at a smaller independent gallery.
Oh, like say the Hornsby Art Show.
Yeah, something like that, like Hornsby Art Show, or anything that's at a specific gallery, like oh gosh, now I can't even think of a single gallery name. White Rabbit Gallery. There's lots of the little independent galleries. They have shows all the time. But yeah, if you've been to a Hornsby Art Show, what was good about it? What was not good about it?
I didn't get to it, so I can't comment.
Oh, okay. I thought that's why you're bringing it up. Nope. Okay. Has anyone else been to any shows? Any exhibitions? No comment. Okay.
I went to one in Adelaide recently, and it was the artist's name is slipping my mind. Oh no.
That's okay, don't stress.
Oopsies. It will come back to me in a second.
Yeah, that's all good. Was it a big name, or was it like a yeah, okay, yep. And so was it good or bad? Like, what was your experience?
It was good because it had a mixture of his mediums. So I think there was some sculptures on the outside that he'd made, and then there were like paintings on the inside, and it was all set up in a way that it was divided into like 4 sections, And each section you went into, it was just like seeing a different theme that he worked on, but they were all pretty similar. But yeah, it was just lovely to see the progression over time and how he explored his art practice.
Yeah, awesome.
I actually did go to a small exhibition at Chatswood earlier this year, and it was a father and son, and it was sort of paintings of things around Sydney Harbour and also birds, and then there was a big painting that the son had entered in the Archibald Prize. It was quite good and quite interesting, but it was in a small space and there was too many people. So that's one thing that I comment. So it made it hard to actually look at the. They sort of invited a lot of people along to try and build up interest, but then there was actually too many people there, so you could hardly see the pictures. But yeah, no. So that was a small exhibition.
Well, and that's a good point, I think, to make as well when we're talking about sort of smaller independent exhibitions, is that the space can often be limited. And exactly as you say, the bigger the crowd, the harder it can be to actually view the works. It can almost become like a, like a cocktail party or something, and the artworks people start to lose focus that they're actually there to look at artworks, and instead they just get sort of wrapped up in having drinks and eating nibblies. So that's something that we need to consider as well, is, is there a way for us to make sure that people aren't stepping or staying too close to the artworks and blocking the view of the artworks for other people? Is there a way to sort of, herd or shepherd people into an area that has less artworks and allow people to move more freely around the areas that have artworks? Those are sort of important considerations to make sure that the focus remains on the art, even if, we're encouraging people to have a couple of drinks and have a nice time as well. Good. Let's have a little think then. We don't have to go through all these questions, but let's have a little think about the engaging our audience, and in particular the local community. So especially if we consider our exhibition, we're in the sort of Hornsby community, or the Hillshire kind of community. So what are some ways that we can kind of engage that local audience, or engage anyone else that we might consider to be our audience?
I suppose by advertising, like putting signs up.
So putting signs up in our street, in Hunter Street, we've got a little bit of foot traffic that goes past.
Yeah, outside the doctor's coffee shop. That's places like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you can do it digitally as well on Facebook or.
So certainly using social media is quite important. Any other ways that we can think of? And this would apply to, if it was your own show, if it was your own exhibition, how would you, aside from just social media, how would you be engaging your own audience?
I'd be ringing up all my friends and saying, please come.
Absolutely. Yeah. The majority of people that we're going to be trying to invite to an exhibition would be people that we know, our own sort of social networks. So absolutely, call up all your friends and invite everybody. We can also be looking at things like any associated councils or art societies. So especially the Hornsby Art Society is a very active art society compared to some others. And the Sydney Art School has a good relationship with them. So we would certainly want to approach them, discuss with them, are they prepared to send out an email to their members? Would any of them want to come along, as in the, president or chairperson or whatever? And then also same with local council. Local councils are often, you know, quite keen to support local endeavours, especially things that are, you know, artistic or creative, that enhance the local community. So try to get the local council involved, either by just contacting them and inviting them, or you know, getting things posted on local community Facebook groups or anything like that. These are all good ways of contacting a broader community that are not necessarily people that we directly, personally know. All right, cool. So let's have a think too about how this exhibition can create further professional opportunities for us, for you as individuals. Let's go through some ideas. So give me some thoughts on that, how you think it might create professional potential, professional opportunities for you. What would you potentially get out of this?
I guess you get a bit of feedback as to how what people think of your work because you've got it on display.
Mm-hmm. Yep, so you get some live feedback about your work. What other things are we getting out of it? We've got 6 people here. Jane's answering all the questions at the moment, so someone else jump in with an answer.
It can also be spreading the word and give opportunities for other people to buy your work, not just family.
Mm-hmm. So
it spreads the word.
Yeah, so kind of getting more exposure, broadening your network of people who are exposed to your art. Yeah.
And also practicing writing an artist statement.
Yeah. Yeah, good. So like experience with presenting yourself in a professional kind of way. Yeah, good. I've got a few things here. Some of these we've already said, but developing a portfolio, especially if you're thinking about wanting to have a portfolio for future job prospects or even enrollment in, you know, university or any other further education. We mentioned exposure and enhancing your professional network. Another big one, potential big one, sales, financial gain. So if you're selling your work, then you could potentially make some money. Definitely experience. So having the experience of being involved in an exhibition will make it easier for you to be involved in future exhibitions or run them yourself. Becoming more entwined with the local community, getting to know people within the local community, and building better peer relationships. So also developing your relationships with other artists. Because again, this is such a good thing that we can be getting while we're at art school, meeting other artists, becoming friends with them, potentially doing shows with them in the future, collaborating with them, or even just having the support of other people, getting feedback and, you know, criticism and help bouncing ideas off of each other. It's certainly something that I do with most of the tutors at Sydney Art School. I've had discussions with all of them about my work, about their work, about what we're doing, where we're going, what we're thinking about, how we're developing things. We do give each other a lot of feedback and criticism and, you know, help and support each other. And so this has come partially from just working together, so all sort of being together in the same workplace, but some of these relationships, like I've known Christina Rogers and I've known Michael Sims for many years from our own previous studies. And so both of them I've had a very long relationship with, and we've always kind of worked together and helped each other. And it's so beneficial no matter what sort of position in your career you are in. So don't be shy. Take it as an opportunity to talk to your peers and learn from them. Ara just asked, can I use these answers in the assessment task group discussion section? Yeah, absolutely. Because that's what we're doing. We're having a group discussion. Yes, 100%. And I sort of said this at the beginning. I'm not sure, you might not have been in the room then, but I said at the beginning, any answers that we're giving or discussing during these assessment tutorials, you can just pop straight into assessments, because even if it's not an answer that you came up with yourself, because it's a discussion that we're having, you're getting that information, put it straight in there. Don't think too hard about it. Now, research, quite important when we're thinking about developing our exhibition. And this is not just about developing the theme and the title, but also in the development of your own work. So it's important to do research, and it's research that's thinking about your themes, your titles, but it's also research and thinking about what is attractive to your audience, and what your potential target audience is likely to respond to. Some of this language, I think sometimes, especially for people who are artistic, it can feel a little bit too, maybe businessy, or a little bit too much like you're trying to scam someone almost, like you're trying to trap a group of people into buying your artwork. But it's not, it doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to think about it in such sort of mercenary terms. It's more about being clear in your own head and in your own heart about what your goals are and how you can meet those goals. And some of those goals are probably going to include other people. And so learning about those other people, learning about the people who are going to be interested in your work, who are going to respond to your work, is really important. Those people might be just like you. Like one of my personal kind of, I guess, professional or artistic goals that I've had for many years kind of relates to the Caravaggio story I told as well, is I've always wanted to just have an impact, to create some kind of emotional impact on a viewer. So making a sale, or having a really successful artistic career is sort of less important to me than having that kind of emotional connection, like making someone feel something very deeply when they look at my artwork. That's a professional goal that I have. So from that perspective, if I want to have that kind of impact on an audience, I need to know what an audience is likely to respond to, because that will help me think about or understand what sort of works I should be producing, and what themes, what ideas, what colors I should be using, all of that kind of stuff. So doing that kind of research and making notes, being more rather than just having a vague idea in your head, actually writing some ideas down, looking into it, finding trends, finding patterns, seeing what people are doing, seeing what they're likely to respond to. It's all going to help you have a more sort of direct and less kind of scattered approach to developing your work and producing your work. When it comes to your specific exhibition, I mean, this is talking about the individual artworks themselves. But if we're thinking about an exhibition, then researching what people's behaviors are, what they're likely to look at, what they're likely to respond to, is about then attracting them in so that they will want to engage with your exhibition and with your artwork. So there's lots of really good and important reasons to be conducting research, both before or while you're developing your artwork, and also while you're developing your exhibition. I know it says, what other reasons can you think of? We've got another sort of little bits of group discussion, but we are starting to slightly run out of time. So, well, we might just sort of push through a little bit. So this group discussion about how can we take unrelated artwork ideas and find common threads to create an exhibition theme, and how can we go about being inclusive when making idea suggestions. So how can we take unrelated artwork ideas and find common threads to create an exhibition theme? We've sort of slightly touched on this, especially with some of the examples that we looked at when with that group show, the video that we watched, you know, being able to sort of find a theme, look for those threads and kind of weave it together. That is that's something that it's, I think, possible to do with almost any collection of works. But the second question, how can we go about being inclusive when making idea suggestions? I think that is an interesting one to maybe sort of briefly discuss. So what would be some ways that we can make sure that we are being inclusive when we're making our suggestions, suggestions, and this is for the overall kind of theme or title of our exhibition.
I guess you can ask everyone to make suggestions and see if there's some suggestions that keep coming up to be quite similar, and then maybe have a vote or something on it.
Yeah, fantastic. I think that's very much along and that's very much along the lines of what happens every year when we do that. So we get as many ask everyone to give as many suggestions as they can, and sort of see if there are some common threads that are kind of developing, if people are saying more or less the same thing but in a slightly different way, and then, you know, can we make a slightly broader suggestion that incorporates a few different ideas, and then we vote, and then and that's exactly how things will go. So yes, very good. If we were to think about one of our own artworks, as an example, as sort of a practice, think about an artwork that you've currently produced and see if you can relate an artwork to one of these themes: wilderness or frontier, cabinet of curiosities, complementary opposites, psychology, coexisting worlds, gravity, familiarity, or severed ties. So imagining for a second that one of these has become our theme for the exhibition. Let's go with complementary opposites. Have a think about the artworks that you've already produced. Is there a piece amongst the artworks you've already produced that you could fit to the theme of complementary opposites? So complementary opposites, what does that, first off, we might say, okay, well, what does that mean? What would be a, you know, a definition or an example of complementary opposites?
Well, you could mean colours,
Mm-hmm.
or you might mean subjects that are completely different to each other but go together.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit of a hard one.
So yeah, complementary opposites, you could be meaning colours, or you could be meaning exactly that. So two things that are in opposition but still working together somewhat. Let me just, what I'm going to do to give us an example here, I will pull up one of my own works at random. Okay. So this is a charcoal drawing that I did recently. It's of a young Balinese girl who's in like a traditional headdress. She's a rendang dancer. I can think of a way to make this fit the theme of complementary opposites. Can anyone else? It's a modern photo, just by the way, like it's a modern reference. It's one of my mum's photographs, actually. Any thoughts?
Maybe the feathers in her, are they feathers in a headdress?
The headdress it's made of metal. So
All right. So the metal and stuff is completely the opposite to sort of smooth complexion and skin. Like,
yeah. So we could say that's a good example. So there's a sort of the complementary opposites of the materials, the soft, youthful skin compared to the metal, hard, rigid metal of the headdress. What I was thinking of is the kind of complementary opposites of the very traditional dress and style of the rendang dancing, and the fact that it's such an old tradition that's steeped in history, and yet modern young women are still consistently engaging in that practice. And so it's this, lovely continuing tradition and continuing history that you see, where it's girls who are otherwise dressed in modern ways and carrying around mobile phones, and then the next minute they're dressed up in this extremely traditional clothing and practicing really traditional dancing and cultural practices. To me, that's a complementary opposite. And obviously I've got an advantage here of knowing some of the context of this image, but that's not how or why I made this image. It wasn't thinking specifically about that term complementary opposite, but it's a way that we can kind of wedge it in there. It's not perfect, but it's possible. So let's come back here. And so instead of me choosing another one, does anyone have an existing artwork that they feel like wasn't specifically related to one of these themes, but you could sort of wedge it in there and relate it to that theme?
sorry that I keep talking.
No, that's right. It's better than silence, mate.
So I was thinking of a painting that I'd done of a waterfall in your watercolor class. And I like that painting because I think it's sort of mindfulness, like it's just something flowing, and you look at it and you're thinking about sort of something that makes you feel calm. So psychology, it could go in there. It could also go in wilderness frontier. Could go in gravity because it's water falling.
Yep. You'd go in familiarity as well.
Familiarity, yeah. So so that was when you first put it up and said think of a painting, that's the one I thought of as the waterfall.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, so that's a good example then of, we've got like 1, 2, 3, 4 out of this list that you could apply one painting to. So as much as it's not necessarily always easy, it is, I think, possible when you've got a theme that is relatively open. Excellent. Here's an example. We've got an example of 3 different artworks. Whoops. 3 different artworks, 3 different artists, 3 fairly different kinds of practices. Just looking at them, not knowing much about them necessarily, we've got a painting by James Gleeson. We've got an installation piece, pigments, wood and plaster. And then we've got a virtual reality sort of, I mean, how would you describe that then? It's kind of like an installation, I guess, in the sense that it's a, it's a space that you have to move into. Imagine if we had to come up with a theme that's going to tie these three together. What would be something that we could tie these three together with thematically? And in tying them together, you can, and we're just doing it based sheerly on their looks. So what are we looking at? What shapes are we seeing? What imagery can we see? What colors can we see? Do any of those make us feel that there's a connection between some kind of common human experience or thought process or, place, setting, environment, history, tradition, culture? Throw something out there. I haven't heard anything from Sophie or Riley yet. I'd love to hear something.
Celebration, I'm going to suggest. I can't think of anything else.
Celebration, yeah, why not? So why are we saying celebration?
The middle one is called As If to Celebrate. So then the one on the left, the arrival of impeccable gifts. I just can't really see what it's a picture of, but I thought maybe, and the chalk room, I thought you can just call it celebration. This is a very vague sort of word that doesn't mean that encompasses a lot of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's sort of the point, is that when we're looking for a big overarching theme, especially when we do have three works that are all different mediums, all very different styles, I mean, entirely different periods of time, trying to find a way to connect them, it has to be quite general. It has to be quite broad, and it has to be quite general. That's right. Yeah. So Sophie's saying both Celebrate and Chalk Room aren't on canvas, so they're both 3D works. Yeah, that's right. Can we think of any specific theme, idea, something that would connect these works together? Imagine we have put them in the same space.
Call them something like imaginings.
Imaginings, yeah, that's nice. There's certainly an amount of abstraction to all three of the works. James Gleeson is very well known for his sort of surrealist kind of compositions. Ara said, all can be seen as celebrating the act of giving or how we perceive the world. Yeah, so maybe even perception, different ways of perceiving the world, the time and space. There you go. Yeah, good. So themes like that, nice and kind of broad and open, allow for interpretation, allow for us to kind of fit works within that broader kind of space, that broader interpretation. Good. No pressure, because it is just a practice exercise, but that's got us thinking, so that's very good. If we can look a little bit about, so the group theme that we will need to come up with, as I said, you can be prepared to maybe adjust your work a little bit, but generally we will try and keep the themes pretty open. But something that is important as well is being prepared to compromise and operate as a collective, not just an individual. And what I mean by that is sort of as we mentioned before, as Jane kind of said, we'll definitely put together lots of ideas. People may, have a discussion about why they're voting for a specific idea or why they really want a specific kind of theme. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a vote, and it's going to be based on the majority of the group. So making sure that no one kind of comes away from it saying, oh, well, I didn't get my way, so therefore I don't want to participate. Just remember, it's a big cohort. You're going to have to compromise. You're probably not going to get exactly what you want. And that's okay. It's an important lesson to learn, especially with group shows, that there will be some diversity and there will be negotiation. And you've got to learn to kind of work with other people and work with each other so that you can get something that works maybe 80%, 70% for everybody. I've got a couple more videos here, but I think we're just going to need to skip those. I will send out the PDF of this slideshow. And so once I send that out, you can watch those videos in your own time. What I do want to get to is the next slide here, which is a little bit about copyright and intellectual property. So it's really important that we have an understanding of copyright and intellectual property law. There's certainly in most of your assessments, there will be at least something that touches on those topics and ask you to have a look at Arts Law website, which gives us a lot of information about copyright and IP relating to artists. But it's making sure primarily that if you are using other sources as reference material, or you are referencing them, or you're I've completely forgotten the word that I'm looking for there. If you are appropriating them, that you are adhering to copyright law. So where possible, I'd always encourage you to use your own reference materials. If you are going to source reference materials, then getting them from either directly from an artist with their explicit written permission, which might include a licensing agreement, is really important. Just acknowledging an artist does not cover you for copyright. So if you've done a copy of someone else's painting and that person is still alive, so the work hasn't gone into public domain, or if you've used their photograph, you acknowledging that the original reference, the original work comes from someone else, is not enough to prevent them from either asking you to remove the image or suing you for copyright infringement. So a lot of people make this mistake. They think, I found an image on Pinterest, I found the artist's name. If I say I did this copy and it's based on this artist's work, that's fine. It's not fine. You need, if the artist is still alive, or if it has been less than 70 years since their death, then the work will still be under copyright, and you need to have explicit written permission from the copyright holder that you are allowed to use that image for your work. And that's relating to anything that has a commercial component. So selling your work, advertising your work, making any kind of money from their image, essentially. So that's just touching on copyright law. You definitely need to make yourself aware of it. Again, the best way to prevent any kind of discussion about copyright law is to always use your own references, or exclusively, if you are using like a reference from somewhere else, making sure that you're going to like a website that has either dedicated licensing arrangement. So if you subscribe to Shutterstock, for example, within Shutterstock, they have a licensing agreement with the artists who are producing work and putting it on Shutterstock. So if you have a subscription, then as part of that contract, you are allowed to use those images. Or there are websites like Pexels or Unsplash, where artists, the photographers are uploading it with specific kind of licensing agreements. Most of the time, those will either be public domain images, or they will otherwise explicitly say that you do not need to license the image or identify the artist. Some of them will say that you have to acknowledge the artist, but you still don't need to, pay them any money or have any kind of license. But keep on top of it and check. Don't rely on Google Images or Pinterest. Is probably the main takeaways from that little commentary. All right. So we've still got a couple of things to go through here. I've only got a few minutes left in the class though, so let's just have a little look. Ironically, the next slide that comes up is time management skills. This is obviously important as you develop your work. Make sure that you are giving yourself, some specific due dates or deadlines, and that you're keeping on top of things. It can be very hard, obviously, and again, I'm not speaking from the place of someone who always has their stuff together and is always well organized and meets all of their deadlines. Things happen, things get in the way, things get lost in the shuffle. It does happen to everybody. But whatever you can do to kind of manage your time and make sure that you are meeting your deadlines and that you're giving yourself enough time to finish your artworks, put your artist statements and titles in a timely fashion, all of those little deadlines. As we go through, as we start working on the exhibition, I will be giving you specific deadlines, and I want you to make sure that you are somehow taking note of those. That might be even putting a reminder in your phone that, hey, this deadline's coming up, because we will have specific deadlines about when your artwork needs to be delivered. Taking photos of your work, giving us your artist titles, your artist statements, the pricing for your work. All of these little jobs will add up, and there will be specific deadlines for each of those jobs. So make sure that you are taking note of those deadlines. I'll keep reminding you as much as possible, but at the same time, you also need to be able to manage yourselves, because we're not in kindergarten anymore. This is an important one that's down here. If you don't complete what needs to be done by exhibition deadlines because of your own lack of organization, it's not going to be an emergency that the staff are going to take care of for you. You're going to have to wear the consequences. So, as I mentioned before, as early as possible, if you're having problems, if something's come up, if there's some specific reason, some kind of emergency that's going to prevent you from doing all of the things that you need to do, let us know as early as possible. Because fundamentally, if you are not on site for installation, opening night, and deinstallation, you will not have the evidence to pass this unit. What happens then is you will need to book a time to have a simulated version of whichever of those you missed. It could be all three of those. And if you need to go through and do a simulated version, you will be paying an extra fee for the time for the assessor to actually observe you doing whatever those activities are. And it happens. Last year during the exhibition, 2 students missed the installation day. They did not give us enough notice. One of them, her excuse was she apparently didn't know what the installation day and time was, despite the fact that I had sent about 15 emails. I text messaged her on the day. I'd sent through Discord messages as reminders. So in the end, she had to book in an additional time and pay an additional fee to be observed by an assessor doing the job requirements. So it is quite serious. Keep yourself organized. Get organized and keep yourself organized. All right. In terms of evidence that you're going to need to gather during the exhibition, So these are things that we will also go through a little bit more in detail during the professional practice sessions. But there's a number of photographs and signs that you need to that you need to get and submit with this unit of competency. So things that you need to have images of yourself during installation and the tear down, the deinstallation of your artwork. You need to have a signed observation form from someone, a tutor or assessor who witnessed you participating in the installation and teardown. You need to have photos of a close-up of one safety feature, for example, fire extinguisher, a photograph of one security feature, a photograph of something which demonstrates professional standards of the exhibition. So, for example, exhibition-related signage or catalogues, a photograph or screenshot of an exhibition document which you used or interpreted. So that might be a Google Doc, an Excel spreadsheet, a list, or a roster. You should take note of any audience feedback you receive on the night about your work, because you will be asked about that. And you need to get a photograph of you performing your designated role on the opening night. And those roles will be decided later, but it might be, if you're serving drinks, get a photograph of you behind the drinks counter. And also get a photograph of yourself standing next to your artwork on the opening night. So these are all pieces of evidence that you will need to have. And it's pretty important that you take note of these, because some of these, if you miss taking that photograph on the opening night, or before or after or during installation, then the same thing will happen. You'll need to do a simulated version of it, and you'll need to be paying an extra fee for the assessor's time to do that simulated version. Excuse me. Final thing we're going to have a look at here in our slideshow is things that you will need to consider. And again, these are things that we will discuss as a group, but also things that you might need to consider as an individual. So budgets, that might be the overall group budget, but also your specific personal budget. Make sure that you keep receipts. And also, whenever you're budgeting, remember that a budget should include everything, regardless of whether you've bought it before. So quite often when people are, like when in the assessments, we'll say, make a budget for your artwork. And quite often I see people say, well, I need to spend $20 on a canvas, and I need to spend $100 on paint, but I already have paint brushes and my palette, so therefore I don't need to spend any money on those. While that might be true, you're not being assessed on whether or not you actually did spend the money. So making a budget is also just a good sort of hypothetical practice for you. So include as much detail as you possibly can. I'm not going to assess you on whether or not you actually did spend that money, but it's important to remember that everything did cost you something at some point. And if you're going to use it up and have to replace it further down the track, then it should be part of your budget. You also need to consider what is possible within the space that you'll be allocated, and so the amount of space that's allocated to you. If you're thinking about doing something that's a little bit outside the box, in terms of, like we had a few years ago now, someone had an image that looked sort of one way under the normal studio lights, but then they set up a black lights sort of on top of it, and as an audience member you could go over and switch on the black light and it would reveal something like a different element within the picture, which was really cool. But part of the discussion that they had with us as the sort of staff and the curation beforehand was making sure that their artwork was positioned close enough to a PowerPoint for the light, and making sure that the light was set up in such a way that there were no trip hazards, there were no, there was nothing that was going to get in the way of other people's artwork, and make sure that it was all sort of safe and secure. So if you've got any interesting ideas, don't just sort of immediately think, oh, well, I can't do it because it's not going to fit with the setup that we have. let me know and we can have a discussion about it. You'll also need to keep on top of your timeline. So that's thinking about your time management. And last thing to really consider for yourselves is whether you want to sell your artwork. And if you do, what kind of price point are you going to put on it? Now, as I said, all of these things are going to be, all things that we will discuss in professional practice sessions, and also not just the ones with me, but with your other tutors as well. When you talk about how to write artist statements and how to price your work, we often have professional practice sessions that relate specifically to those kind of things. But it's worth thinking about even now. It's worth sort of starting to consider what works you're going to put in, if you're going to sell them, and get a vague idea in your head of how much you might like to sell them for. All right. So that's it for my slideshow, and it is almost exactly on 1 o'clock. So we'll call it an end on the day.